Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something pretty wild. A pitch for a system designed to computationally model and, well, navigate our biggest dreams.
And that ambitious idea has a name, LSTG, which stands for Life Skill Tree Generator.
So what are we really talking about here? It's a pitch for a system that wants to take your goals, those big, hazy dreams, and turn them into structured, totally actionable life paths. Okay, let's really dive into this.
All right, so the first question is, why? Why build something like this at all? Well, the core problem it's trying to solve is that our ambition, it's just fundamentally unstructured. We have these huge dreams, but there's no clear map to get from here to there.
And think about the consequences of that. We end up choosing paths that aren't quite right for us, suboptimal paths. We quit early because we're just not sure if we're on the right track. And, maybe the worst one, we can waste years putting in a ton of effort, but it's just misaligned. This really gets to the heart of it, right? Given who I am, and where I want to go, what are my realistic paths? I mean, we get so much generic advice, but there's no system that can really answer that fundamental question with a personalized, navigable map.
Okay, so that's the problem. Let's move on to the core insight behind LST. And honestly, it's a really powerful mental model shift.
The old way of thinking? It's a straight line. A to B. Simple. But the new model LSTG proposes is a skill tree. And what's so interesting here is the core argument. Meaningful goals aren't a straight line at all. They're a tree with tons of different branches and possibilities.
So what does a tree actually represent in this context? Well, it accounts for the real complexity of life in a way a linear plan just can't. It shows you that there are multiple viable paths. It maps out skill dependencies, like you have to learn this before you can do that. It models out progression over time, acknowledges risks and trade-offs, and this is huge. It allows for adaptive rerouting when, life happens.
Okay, that's a cool idea, a life tree. But how do you actually build that? How does LSTG turn this insight into a real functional solution? Well, it all comes down to a concept called pathway intelligence.
And let's be clear, this isn't about motivation or coaching. It's pitched as a totally new interface for human progress. Pathway intelligence is a system that literally converts ambition into these structured, actionable life paths. And the engine behind it all? It's an AI reasoning engine that models all the messy stuff, skills, timelines, dependencies, the works.
So for you, the user, how would this actually work? The process would be pretty simple but incredibly powerful. First, you define your ambition, your big goal. Then, the system generates viable pathways to get there. It models out all the skills and dependencies you'd need. And finally, you can adapt the plan as your life changes. It's dynamic.
Now, you might be thinking this sounds a little sci-fi, right? But the argument is that this idea is only possible right now. And it's because of three huge shifts. First, AI reasoning has finally gotten good enough to model this kind of long horizon planning. Second, non-linear careers are basically the new default, so we need adaptive paths. And third, there's a huge cultural shift happening, where people are optimizing for meaning, not just a paycheck.
But look, any big idea has to face some tough questions. So let's run through a quick stress test with the kind of hardball questions an investor would throw at this.
First up, the big one. Is this just a fancy planner?
And the answer is a firm no. The way to think about it is navigation versus scheduling. Planners are great, but they assume you already know the path. LSTG is designed to model the unknown paths. It's the GPS for your career, not just the calendar for your appointments.
All right, next question. Where's the defensibility? What stops some tech giant from just building this themselves? And this is a really smart answer. The defensibility isn't in the code. Not really. It's in the long horizon behavioral data. The system's unique asset becomes its proprietary data on how people actually progress towards their goals. That's the real goldmine. Okay, this sounds huge. So who is this for first? You can't boil the ocean, so who's the initial target?
The initial audience is super specific. It's for people who are already feeling the pain of having unstructured ambition. Think about career switchers trying to figure out their next move. Builders and founders mapping out a new venture, high-agency learners who are always teaching themselves new things. Basically, anyone planning those big 3 to 10-year goals.
And finally, the billion-dollar question. How does this become big? How does it go from a tool for a few people to something massive? The vision here is to become infrastructure, not just an app. The system could power education, workforce development, even national skill programs. Imagine universities or companies using this pathway intelligence to build their entire curricula or training systems. That's the path to huge scale.
And this really nails the ultimate end goal, a world where every human ambition becomes structured, measurable, and adaptable. A world where any dream can be mapped out.
Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. Seriously, if you had a perfect map for any goal, anything, where would you go first? Something to think about. Thanks for joining this explainer.